This is a supplement to the material on constitutional authority, which I've set forth in the latest posting. So this is some thoughts I have and some observations essentially about the architecture of the Constitution that I think is useful to consider along with the material that I have. If this seems a little herky-jerky, from time to time I get interrupted with incoming messages as I'm hanging out here in my law office. In any event, what I'd like to, I'm looking here at a few notes I scratched out, what I'd like to talk about first is how the U.S. Constitution creates a government of limited power. And I would suggest to you that the need to create a government of limited power was foremost on the minds of the drafters of the Constitution. So I would identify three general ways in which the Constitution creates a government of limited power. The first two ways deal with the distribution of power. And we could think as a general proposition that if power is distributed rather than power residing just in one place, then to that extent the power has been limited. If you will, a limitation of power by diffusing power. And one way that we see this distribution of power is on the horizontal plane, meaning that there is a separation of powers at the national level. If you look at the first three articles to the Constitution, you'll see that the government power, at the federal level, is distributed among the legislative branches, Article 1, the executive branch, Article 2, and the judicial branch, Article 3. And in addition to that distribution, there's a system of checks and balances, as sometimes referred to, where the action taken by one of the three power centers can be checked by an action by one of the other power centers. So, for example, the legislature can pass a law, but the executive, the president, can veto it. And then it takes far more than a simple majority to override the veto. We can see the power sharing also occur when the president has the ability to appoint different individuals to high positions in the government, as, for example, the person who is now president recently appointed a woman to fill the vacancy of RBG on the Supreme Court, and then it's up to the Senate as to whether that appointment will be confirmed or not. So we have that distribution of power and the separation of powers coupled with the checks and balances. So that works on a horizontal plane. Another way that power is distributed in the Constitution is vertically, meaning power is distributed between the national government and then the state governments. This distribution is sometimes known as federalism, so that there are certain powers that the states have that the federal government cannot interfere with, just as there are certain powers that the federal government has, the national government, that the states cannot interfere with. And once again, we see then that power is limited by virtue of the fact that it's been distributed. The third way that the Constitution creates a government of limited power is by actually drawing limitations on what the government can do. Not the only example, but certainly one of the significant examples is the creation of individual constitutional rights set forth, at least initially, in the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, and then sprinkled throughout other parts of the Constitution. But let's just take the First Amendment, the right to free speech. Individuals are given the right to free speech, and no level of government, be it at the federal level or the state or local level, can violate that right. So it may be debatable as to the scope of the right in any given case, but nevertheless, we could certainly say that the creation of individual constitutional rights is another way that the power of the government is limited. So what I'd like to do next is offer what I would identify as legitimate concerns about, on the one hand, disproportionate power given to the least populous areas of the country, and how that disproportionate power given to the least populous portions of the country has created a situation that's reflected over decades in the Supreme Court. So the disproportionate power given to the least populated areas of the country is certainly seen in the U.S. Senate. Each state has 2 places in the Senate, so there's 2 U.S. senators for California, most populous state, and 2 senators in Wyoming, the least populous state. A similar kind of distribution favoring the least populous areas of the country can also be seen in the electoral college, where if you take a look at individual voters based on population size, the voter in California casting a vote for president, that person's vote will be worth far less than the voter in Wyoming when he or she casts the vote for president. And the vote for president is a vote to elect people to the electoral college, which in turn votes for president, but that's based on, these days, party affiliation, and so it's very clear that a individual can be elected president by winning the majority of votes in the electoral college, which these days is 270, and yet receiving far fewer votes when you just take a look at the votes cast throughout the country. And indeed, in 2000, and then in 2016, the individual elected president, Bush Jr., and the current person who holds the office were elected president by receiving the majority of the votes in the electoral college, but received fewer votes when you take a look at individual voting. Now, what we then can end up with, and indeed this is what we have now, we can end up with a Senate where the majority of the Senate, a slight majority, but a majority of the Senate is captured by a political party that's the same as the political party that holds the presidency. It so happens, at least today, that that's the Republican Party. And now what you have is this disproportionate power being worked out so that the minorities reflected in the prejudice against majorities in the Electoral College, and then even more significantly in the Senate, have gained control of the Senate, gained control of the presidency, and can put whomever they want on the Supreme Court, even though if you just took a look at the mass of voters in the United States, that would not reflect at all anything resembling what we could call the majority will. And indeed, what we're going to end up with, arguably, is a person being appointed to the Supreme Court by a political party that may soon lose control of both the Senate and the presidency, but yet that person, having been placed on the Supreme Court, will be there, is what we like to say, for life, meaning they're going to be there until they die or until they retire. And 15 years from now, by way of example, that individual will be wielding the great power that justices on the Supreme Court wield, and that power, it can be submitted, will be out of sync with the majority will right from the very beginning. So that's some thoughts I think are worthy of putting on the table. The takeaway, though, for this presentation really is the first part, where I just want you to be able to give back to me if I ask you what are three different ways that the Constitution creates a government of limited power. And then the second half of what I've been talking about is just really to spark some thinking on your part, and I believe that there are concerns we're going to have to, as a country, wrestle with